It's not yet time to start, but I'm just curious, how many of you went to iCollege and saw the PASS study guides? There are a couple of, okay, the PASS study guide was placed on iCollege yesterday, a little bit before 11, and you will need it just to look at it and look at it pretty thoroughly to do well on the first pass. And it's one of the few study guides I'm going to give. One of the few. And if those of you who went to iCollege might have noticed, the lectures for the lecture I gave Monday for both classes was placed on iCollege. Most of the lectures will be on this class because the other class is a hybrid class that only meets on Mondays and will not meet again until Monday, January 27th. So most of the lectures will be for this class, but the other class will be able to see them because they will need to know what I'm saying to you because they only go to class half the time that you do. Also placed on iCollege was something about in Mehrkar. This is a Sumerian story, folk. I mean, a lot of you are familiar with Gilgamesh. Probably none of you are familiar with the story of Mehrkar and the war against the Lord of Harada. I will be asking that on the test. A little, just one or two questions, not a lot. Now, I want to say this about the test. 6 years ago, I taught this same class to two different classes, a morning and afternoon. And when it came time to give the afternoon test, about 20 of the 25 of them were making A's. I could not prove what I suspected. So you will not be, don't tell me that I said this to be on the test. You and the other class will be taking a different test. I mean, it's completely different questions. So if I say something beyond test, it might not be on your test. It'd be on theirs perhaps, but they might necessarily, in other words, which questions you're going to get on your test, quite frankly, I don't know. Not that I care either. But I made up about 60 questions. You will get 30 of them. They will get 30. So if you know anybody from my other class, you can talk all you want to about what's on the test. Won't benefit me. Again, hopefully all of you understand the reason. Also, the test, when I pass it out, I'll pass it out in such a way, I mean, you students are sitting kind of close together. It'll be the same questions but jumbled. So what you get will not be what the person beside you gets. It's the same questions but jumbled. And all of you, I hope, know the reason for this. I mean,
as long as we're able to prepare for it, it's fine.
What's that?
As long as we're able to prepare for it, okay, it's fine.
You're able to prepare. I believe so. I mean, all right. The last two semesters I'm giving the test similar to this one. About a third of the students have made A's and another third have made B's. I had one young lady sitting in the back of the room. About 2 minutes in the test, just got up, threw both the pass and the test in the trash can and walked out. Never saw her again. A few days later, I noticed that she had dropped the course. Folks, now this is not high school. Unlike high school where they spoon feed it to you, you're going to have to do most of the digging yourself. Hopefully we're clear on that. Again, 2/3 of my pupils make A's and B's, but that doesn't mean you will. You have to earn it. Now, some of you know more than others do, I can tell. The ones of you who already know a lot of this have an advantage, but not an unfair one. The other ones are expected also. I was expected to learn it also. All right, it's 4 o'clock. Does anybody have any questions before I proceed? Comments? Okay. You might better pay attention to the stuff I write on the board. Most of everything I write on the board will appear on the test in either your test or the other classes, but you need to know the stuff I write on the board. If you don't see it, the other class likely will. All right. Before I get into the word cuneiform, wait a minute. Actually, I really should go over the syllabus first. Yeah, but by now, if you haven't downloaded the syllabus, I'm sorry. I try hard to stick to it as close as I can. So look at it carefully. The instructions for getting onto iCollege and logging into iCollege are on the syllabus. If you have to use a syllabus to get onto iCollege, did I say to get on to Turnitin? The instructions for Turnitin are on the syllabus. And you have to have the syllabus to get on to Turnitin in order to turn in a paper, because the syllabus has the numbers that you'll need. You might notice I give more attention to chapter 1 than I do the other chapters. And I pay more attention to, basically I pay far more attention to Western civilization than I do the other civilizations. I mean, this is a Western country. So I'll give about 3 days to Greece and 3 days to Rome and about 5 days to chapters 12 and 13, which is European, medieval Europe. The other chapters only give 1 day to. Chapters 2 and 3, 1 day. Chapters 5, wait, not chapter 5, chapters 6 and 8, 1 day. Now chapter 7, Islam. I do give 2 days to that. I started that about a year ago, owing to the fact that Islam has suddenly become so very, very important to the world. And I feel like it warrants giving extra time to. So I took some time away from European history to give extra time to Islam. But the other chapters, 1 through 1 day apiece, just the highlights, folk. Oh yeah, final exam, May 2nd, 4 to 6. In other words, the same room, same time of day, 4 p.m. for the final exam. Be sure that you notice the final exam time. Now, for the first time in years, I had a pupil email me several days late, Mr. Cunningham, I didn't know about the final exam. All I could do was tell him sorry. Of course, he didn't turn in a paper either, so that meant that 55% of his grade was F. Anyway, this person. But anyway, and oh yeah, I got in big, bold letters. I used to get this. I haven't gotten much more. Do not ask me to change the final exam time. It's against state law. It's against the rules of this school. And this school, college has suddenly joined Georgia State. I don't want to get caught flagrantly breaking the rule of this school. Now, hopefully nobody else hearing it, because I teach 2 classes, same class. If you wish, you can come at 1 o'clock in a room upstairs, and you can find out and take the final exam at that time with them. I mean, it's the same, but it's not the same test. You can. I'm not supposed to say that, but I did. But don't ask me to give you the final exam at a later date, a later time. I simply can't. And another thing, please, don't ask me to come to this campus on Tuesday or Thursday or Friday. I'm not being paid that much to do that. I mean, I'm part-time. And the school saves a lot of money by hiring part-time help. Do the math. And more restaurants are hiring part-time help and finding a full-time job. It's going to be very difficult for you going forward. You all know whose fault it is. Part-time is the way things are going these days, but I'm part-time. But anyway, don't ask me to make a special trip here for you. I simply can't. And I had a student offer to, I'll pay you for the gas and come. No. If I got caught accepting money from one of you, that would be the last of my days here. Don't. Don't. Oh, yeah. So, no, but anyway, if you have to make up a test, talk to me about it. We'll work up a time on Monday or Wednesday only. That's convenient for both of us. Sometime Monday, and I'm willing to come in here as early as 7 or 8 o'clock on Mondays or Wednesdays, because it won't cost me any more for gas. To come in early in the morning, I'm willing to stay late. Because when I leave the class, I mean, anybody knows anything about Atlanta traffic, when I leave the campus at 5:15, it's the worst time in the world to leave the campus. So I'm staying here till 6:30 or 7 anyway, just to get less traffic, eating a meal before I leave, and then hit the road and having a nice straight thoroughfare through. But I'm willing to stay late. I'm willing to come in early, Monday, Wednesday only. Again, that's on the syllabus. You see me about making up tests. The way I grade, again, folks, that's on page whatever of the syllabus. I hope it's pretty much self-explanatory. So your grades will be posted on iCollege. And the reason for that is I used to have a student who's going, what are my grades in this class? Well, hey, all I have to do is say, go to iCollege. And there you can find your grades, and there you can average them up, add them up, throw out the low test score on your test only, your hourly test only. Throw out the low test score. And again, I give a sample. All right. Missed pass must be made up. The pass and now, oh yeah, you don't have to make up. If you already have an A average, you've taken 4 of the 5 tests, you don't have to take the 5th one. But now that does not apply to the final exam. You must take, and here's why. Some years ago, I'd exclude the final exam, and I'd have half my class not take the final exam. And that meant that I wound up giving 17 A's to 22 pupils, and that's not good for me or you either one, because the curve was often 40 points. But there was one day where one semester where an A student had her grandmother die at the end of the semester. And she came and took the final exam and made 35 points better than everybody else. And the curve didn't help anybody. And she set the curve by a big margin. So anyway, what I'm saying is I now require that even the A students take the final exam. Everybody must take the final. That way there are not as many A's, and if you make an A on a final, then you know you have earned it.
Curve all the tests?
The test, all right, not necessarily. Now, I'll tell you something about this first test. I generally don't curve it because 4 or 5 pupils are going to make probably 100 on it. Now, the multiple choice test, I always wind up curving, and here's why. With multiple guess tests, it's so easy for even a top student to miss one. I mean, I've taken tests where I've run through the Scantron and found this is an easy one. One person missed it. Who missed that question? And look, it was usually some A+ student who missed it, who assumed that it was a trick question because it looked too easy. I actually meant it to be an easy question. But it's easy, even for top student. I mean, hey, I took a bunch of government tests to get my FCC license, commercial and amateur. And I've got the top commercial license, top amateur license. But I would practice multiple choice tests. I know how easy it is to misread a question or miss one word. So I always wind up curving but this first test will be short answer or short answer. And usually there's no curve. One of you will probably make two of you will probably make 100%. As you may have noted, I do take attendance. There might be snow days. The weatherman was saying it might snow Saturday night and Sunday morning, but only flurries. But then he said that's subject to change. But we can have snow up until the middle of March, folk. And back in 2010, yeah, we had a snowstorm in mid-March. Some of you might remember it. Extra credit, now, all right. It's not allowed by the college. However, what they do allow me to do is give 6 points to those of you who turn in your paper early. Turn in your paper. Now, you might think those 6 points don't make a difference. But if you turn it in really late, it's so late that I have to take off 10 points, that's a spread of 16 points. That can change your average vote by a total of 4 points, which will probably, in 40% of the cases, change your grade by a whole letter. I've seen it happen. Again, do the math. Turn in that paper ahead of time if you really want. Now, I say I'm giving 6 points to the students who turn their papers in early. Some of you might guess who winds up turning their papers in early? Most of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time. It's some A+ student who doesn't need the extra points anyway. I'll give them the extra 6 points and move on. And the rest of them, why can't I get an A in this class? Well, all right. Again, I hope that this thing about the paper is self-explanatory. Password, assumer, capitalize S. I do have comments here about plagiarism. If you score above 85%, I'll take off 10 points off your paper grade. I've been a little bit lenient on that. Well, I only had one case last semester where a student had a high. I said, if you'll just redo your paper, I'll forget all about this. She did. This was the one who copied and pasted directly from Wikipedia, because she was in a hurry to get the extra 6 points. Well, she didn't get the extra 6 points. Her plagiarism score was about 95%. Really high. Few things about myself, just basic stuff. Then about this, if you have a disability, you can slip in your paperwork to me here, and we can sometime really soon, we'll walk over to the disability office and discuss it. If you need to take a test, special, all in a separate room from everybody else. Every once in a while, I get a student with that kind of issue. Just slip the paper to me quietly, and I'll contact you by email or some way. Maybe I'll ask you to step in the hall and we'll talk about it. But we do accommodate you. Title IX, yeah, we do accommodate that. Cell phone, oh yes. Well, I have 2 daughters. One of them said that she has a teacher that will take up cell phones before every test and put them in a stack and say, when you're through the test, you can have them back. I don't, but I want to remind you folk something. Looking at a cell phone during a test is a first class no-no. Holding a cell phone up to here during a test is a no-no. Don't do it. All I can do. Now, another thing about the test, folks. Now, all of you, I hope, are young and in good health. If you decide to leave the room during a test, you have to ask you to turn your paper. If you are having problems that day, make sure you take care of the problem before the test. But I can't let you leave the room and come back and finish the test. I mean, there's some things we have to have a certain amount of rules. So try to accommodate me that far. Some of the tests will be multiple choice and some will be short answer. All right, let's see. What else? There might be some exceptions to cell phone use. I mean, if you say my father is at the point of death or something, well, let me know in advance. I'm expecting this really urgent call about a really big job. Hopefully they can text you. But there might be a few exceptions made. I mean, that's what's all right. Having said that, anybody have any questions? Again, I hope the syllabus is self-explanatory, and I hope you can all figure out how to average up your grades. Count your pass score once, your test scores with the low score thrown out 4 times, your paper grade 2 times. In other words, toward the end of April, you still have a big part of your grade. Like your final exam, which counts twice, your paper, which counts twice. That means 44% of your final grade is yet to be determined. All right. Final exam, oh yeah, I'll get this question. It's comprehensive. Well, half of the test will be on chapters 12 and 13, because I don't give a test on chapters 12 and 13 more, except the final half of it's chapters 12 through. The other half is chapters 1 through 11, comprehensive. There'll be at least 1 or 2 questions from every chapter on the final exam. And because of the nature of what I have to do, grading a short answer or fill in the blank test takes hours, folks. Come final exam, I guarantee it will be multiple choice. Grading that is a matter of running through the Scantron machine, getting it in and getting it out, putting a grade on it, and basically averaging up your grades and getting out of here. Now, something else I want to say about if you decide you don't want to take this class, do me and you a favor, and do another student here a favor. Go through the process of dropping and withdrawal. Because that way, there is a waiting list for this class, and if you withdraw, somebody else can come in. Now, since Monday, I've had 5 students withdraw, and 5 more take place. But do yourself, also, if you don't withdraw, at the end of the semester, all I can do is give you an F. If you withdraw before the deadline, you don't get an F. If you withdraw, or if you don't withdraw at all, or if you withdraw after the deadline, of course, you do get an F. Are we clear on it? I mean, that's in the student handbook. The deadline is on the syllabus, drop deadline is on the syllabus, and you will have 3 tests before the drop deadline. And if you decide you don't like the teacher or don't like something I'm saying, I mean, folks, we're living in a country right now where everybody is so super sensitive and so hypersensitive, and freedom of speech is just about out the window. Okay? You've got to have tolerance for another point of view. If you don't, I don't know what to say to you. All right, any questions? Okay, syllabus. All right. Well, probably all of you know this. I mean, when I was at Lockheed, I worked in calibration. Of course, I learned this when I was in elementary school. How is this word pronounced? Pounds. Yeah, pronounced pounds. It doesn't spell that way. This word was borrowed from another language, the Latin word libre, which in Latin means pounds. This is one of the few cases in the English language where we use a word that doesn't even have, not even close to phonetic spelling, but yet everybody learns in elementary school how it's pronounced. Hopefully you did. I mean, those of you who went through American schools. The Sumerian language was largely written just like this, folk. Now, I did some research on the Sumerian language between Monday's class and this one, and it looks like, I mean, again, a lot of the Sumerian words were taken from other languages. However, scholars are really in disagreement as to what language it might have been taken from. And I've had to know, well, if they took their words from what language was it? If you want my opinion, not only do I not know, not only does no scholar today know, I suspect the Sumerians themselves didn't know. Why is this important? All right, you've probably heard. And again, if you read what I wrote about in Merkar, they're going to have a section on this, the Tower of Babel story, where they all woke up one day and could not understand each other's language. I think that this is proof, folks, that the events, something similar to the Tower of Babel, actually would have occurred. It's not just a story mentioned in the Bible. It's mentioned in the cuneiform text written by the Sumerians. And part of the evidence is so much of their language was just like this. Their spelling of the word in no way matched the way they pronounced it. Now, granted, of course, if you look up the Sumerian language, you'll find that we do not know how a lot of the words were pronounced. And it appears they used the same symbols that had to have meant one thing in one context, and apparently meant another. Of course, every language does this, but it looks almost like that if you said it in a low tone, it meant this. And if you said it in a higher tone, it would have meant this. That these people might actually have almost sang their language to each other. Let's see. Anyway, there will be a couple of questions on the story of in Merkar and the Lord of Errata. And I will have more to say about Errata also when we come to chapter 2. I suspect, but folk, I cannot prove that Errata is Harappa, one of the cities that we'll run into in chapter 2. Don't worry about this thing for the first test. You'll see it on the second test, or if you don't, the other class. Harappa, Errata, almost sounds alike. Anyway, all right. Now, cuneiform. Cuneiform, the word cuneiform means wedge-shaped. It eventually evolved into shapes like this. Now, the advantage to that was they could write with a stylus, and all I do is tap the stylus, and all I have to do is movements with the hands. One movement if they wanted the wedge to go one way, and a right angle movement if they wanted the wedge to go another way. I do bang, 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 bang. And they could write in cuneiform with a stylus by just simply pounding with their hand and moving their hand and making the wedges. Oh yeah, I forgot. There was a wedge like this. You'll see this symbol in your book, by the way, those of you who have the book. This was their word for sun, or some books will say it was their word for God. They looked on the sun as being, some of them at least looked on the sun as being their God. Sun or God. And again, I'm looking on page 15 in my book. Your book says it was God or sky. The most common symbol, by the way, you'll find in cuneiform, this symbol right here. And that writing seems to have evolved over time, beginning with the Sumerians being the inventor of writing. Now,
What other civilizations were before the Sumerians?
well, now that is a really, really good question. See, some people believe that the Sumerians were the first civilization. The other civilization might have come along at the same time, the Indus Valley civilization over in the Indus River 1,000 miles away. We now know that the Sumerians and Indus people had contact with each other. You find Indus goods and Sumerian goods in the Indus Valley. But which one of them came first, we don't know. Also in South America, there's some civilizations that might be as old as Sumeria, but as far as we know, none of them are older than the Sumerian civilization. All right, good question though. So the Sumerians seem to have been the first, and they seem to be the inventors of so much, including the inventors of religion, the inventors of schools, the inventors of government, the inventors of kingship, and inventors of a lot of institutions we take for granted, the temple. And so many of the world's mythologies seem to have their origins traced back to the Sumerians. And a lot of persons say that all the religions, except for the monotheism, a word I must put down, monotheism, as opposed to polytheism. All right, anybody seen these words before? Yeah, monotheism, one God, polytheism, many gods. In the ancient world, it appears that for a time the only monotheistic people that were around were the Jewish people, the Hebrews. Abraham and his descendants may have been the only monotheistic around. And that's strange because in the modern world, your three great Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are all monotheistic. It's like monotheism took over last. But at one time, polytheism seemed to be the order of the day, and it's just amazing how that polytheism largely died out, at least in the West, and was replaced by monotheism. Now, why is it important? Well, folk, what I'm about to say is a little bit controversial, and you might not initially see it. But if, for instance, if the wind is God, persons who believe that nature is God, that the wind is God, the sun is God, believe that these things have a mind of their own. Well, if nature has a mind of its own, that means, folk, in the long run, you cannot have devices such as this one. What you may or may not know is this little device here. It is an El Cheapo. I paid $1 for it. Yeah, but of course it's cost me a lot more than that to maintain it, to keep it up. But yeah, but it was an El Cheapo. It has 1 million little transistors inside. It's working together in some kind of harmony. You put together transistors, diodes, and microchips, microprocessors, 1 million of them. And if you put together another device like this one, and this is very important, the other device will do the same thing. Oh, what's the big deal? The ancients did not know this. This device does not have a mind of its own. Your automobile. All right, if you were to go outside after the class and try to start your car, it wouldn't start. And you decide, well, it doesn't start because the spirit of engine is not in it, so I'm going to offer a sacrifice to engine God. They would put you in they'd arrest you first of all, and consider putting you in an insane asylum second of all. This was the way the ancient man's mind worked. To some extent, he believed that nature is God. And if nature is God, then nature has a mind of its own, so nature will either work for me if he wants to, or nature will not work for me if he doesn't want to. So very important. Monotheism says that, oh yeah, there is a God who made the earth, and the earth therefore, or there's all the elements obey natural laws, and they have to obey them. And that way you put two cars together with the same blueprints and make them the same way, they'll perform the same way. They'll do the same thing. That's monotheism. Polytheism, now each car has a mind of its own, and if he wants to work, he will. If he doesn't want to work, he won't. And the result was they never made technological progress because they never believed. Now, that may contradict what I believe that polytheism, such as we meet with it, was actually degenerate from original monotheism, and this is a controversial point, but that the original religion of mankind was in fact monotheism. And then they degenerated down to polytheism a while, and eventually at least some people wound up going back to monotheism later, due to the fact that it became obvious to them that polytheism did not perform very well for them. Now again, not everybody will agree with this, and I understand that. Okay. Again, something else I must mention about early man. The earliest man we know about who's really fully human is the Neanderthal, followed by the Cro-Magnon man, followed by modern Homo Now, the Neanderthal man has been looked on as being a primitive man, and some people even say, oh, he could not even speak. But then as time goes on, he becomes a little more human. But we have, and folk, you won't hear this from every source, we have instances where the Neanderthal and modern Homo sapiens are buried side by side, indicating that they might have cohabited, and that Neanderthal was actually fully human. He was just simply a different variety of humans. But something else you'll notice about both of these men, they were larger on average than modern man, and they had a larger brain capacity, both of them, than modern men have. Leading in my zoology book, which I still have from the year 1967, leading the author of the zoology book to suggest that modern man might actually be degenerate. Instead of evolving upward, he devolved downward. Again, both of these men, bigger brains, and might have been stronger than modern humans. And you'll still find some texts that insist that Neanderthal was not human. The evidence is such that you can believe what you choose to. Yes? Cro-Magnon. Now, I think I told this class how that some 10 years ago I had my DNA studied, and the Cro-Magnon man had the R1b haplotype gene, which most Western Europeans carry, including me. So basically, being a Cro-Magnon man, most Europeans have the same ancestry. The Cro-Magnon man is fully human, but he appears to be a better human. Now, as man went on, he degenerated in size, and judging by the size of his armor, the average European during the Middle Ages, the height of the average man was only about 4'6". And you might say, well, how come man today became larger? It's not because of better diet so much. It's more because modern man has married over the horizon, you might say, married strangers. My dad was from Pennsylvania, married a Kentucky girl. In the meantime, I married a Florida girl. This is good, not always good for us socially, but it's good for our genes. But especially Americans. During World War I, American soldiers went back to Europe to fight. And the American was much, much larger than the European. And again, owing to the fact that the American's genetic makeup was more, his ancestors were more diverse than the ancestors of most Europeans. When I talk about the average European in the Middle Ages being 4'6", they were marrying in their own community. And after several generations of marrying in their own community, they almost might as well have been marrying their sisters. But the result was they got shorter and shorter, and the lifespans got shorter and shorter. Then some of them came to America and started marrying. So the Swede would marry the Irish, and the Scotch would marry the French, and some of them married Indians. And folk, I know this might, I don't intend to step on anyone's toe. One reason why you have blacks making professional teams far before the numbers is simply their ancestors were diverse in the ancestry of the whites. If you want to disagree with it, you say so. I mean, I meant that remark as a compliment, but most of you probably know that black people and black men make athletic teams far out of proportion to their numbers of the population. And again, I think it's because their ancestry is much more diverse than the ancestry of Caucasian peoples. All right. In other words, basically, persons who are 6 foot tall or more like their Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal ancestors. It is believed that there's enough Cro-Magnon DNA around, Neanderthal DNA around, to where we could, if we got the right couples together, reproduce the Neanderthal man. Get a person, some people are carrying about 15% Neanderthal DNA. Get these enough of the right genetic combination. We might recreate the Neanderthal. The idea that this experiment is ever going to be carried out, though, is not too likely. All right. Now, while I'm talking about DNA, most of you probably know that DNA is a spiral. And then eventually the spiral breaks in half, with half of the spiral going one way and the other half of the spiral going another way. And now, eventually, every cell in your body has all of your DNA structure in it. This is fundamental biology, except for your reproductive cells, and they have half. They might have this half, they might have this half. And this is true of all species we know of plant or animals that have sexual reproduction. And now, the DNA, the A's must line up with the A's, the B's must line up with the B's, the C's line up with the C's, and so on and so forth. Well, what if an A actually lines up with a C? Well, there's no reproduction possible. All right, now, every gene then, on every individual, whether it be plant or animal or human, must have a corresponding gene it binds when mating occurs, basically. Now, how would a gene move from one chromosome to another? If I have any ideas, and I'll give you a hint if you don't know. I don't know either. Now, my next question is, in the different species, are the genes for the same characteristic located on different chromosomes in different species? You know, the gene for eye color would be located on this chromosome for maybe a camel, and maybe on this chromosome for a cat. My point is, how could genes migrate from one chromosome to another? As far as I know, folk, they can't. And if one did, unless the individual was found another person that had the same genetic reformation, unless he found a member of the opposite sex that had the same genes, reformed gene located in the same place, the line would end with that individual. What am I getting at, folk? In one symbol. Evolution, as taught by Charles Darwin, is for all practical purposes impossible, thanks to what we now know about DNA. With all due respect to Darwin, he knew nothing about DNA. DNA had not been discovered. What we have found out since is that different plants now have different genetic codes. And again, if one gene happened to move to another, even move to a different place on the same chromosome, unless it met up with a member of the opposite sex that had the exact same genetic anomaly, or the same genetic, what can be called deformity, the line would end with that individual.
Unless they adapted to survive.
But it's not a matter of adaptation. All right, maybe it's not a matter of adaptation, not even a matter of survival. It's just that reproduction cannot occur unless all the chromosomes are lined up with the member of the opposite sex, lined up in a line. A to A, B to B, and C to C down the line. So again, it's not a matter of whether or not this individual could survive. It's a matter of the genes have to all be lined up gene to gene. The gene for eye color of this individual of this sex, the gene for eye color of this individual of the opposite, has to be on the same location, on the same chromosome. I see you're not following me. I'm making it as simple as I can. Now, folks, what I intend to teach here is not theology. What I intend to teach is pure science. I see at least one head nodding understand. Pure, from a purely scientific point of view. Yes.
Okay, so last class you said ancients knew more about technology than we do.
Yeah.
Okay, so like if the Neanderthals were like super smart,
Yeah.
bigger brains,
Yeah.
why would they die to like some small dude? It's like, I don't get it.
Okay, I have a book in my house that indicates that the Neanderthal man might have lived to be 300 to 400 years old. Based on some of the things about his bones that we moderns, basically, well, all right, something else. Most animals go through a period of time like their childhood where they enjoy playing games, being playful. Then they mature and become, no, not playful. We humans still die when we're in children. We were meant to go beyond and live for several hundred more years than we actually do. I see you're kind of looking at me puzzled. But I believe, now if I understand the question, why would they die? Well, all creatures eventually die, including turtles that live longer than humans do today, including eventually the giants, the redwood trees that are probably 3,000 years old.
I think his question more was like, if they were competing against each other, how would they lose in a fight against smaller stuff?
Yeah, something
Oh,
smaller
if they were,
than smaller brain capacity.
okay. While they were alive, they were the only creatures alive. There was only Neanderthals. Then the Neanderthals, over time, degenerated into the Cro-Magnon, did not give rise, but they went downhill to the Cro. Then some of the Cro-Magnons
Like they
went
bred out their
downhill to the human. But, I mean, okay, supposing a Cro-Magnon man had a human child, he would probably protect him as much as he could, like parents will do, until he got gone. But basically, this is probably how it happened. And also, throughout our history, the Sumerians learned how to form armies, among other things, and train troops, and to fight in formation. Now, I'm going to get to this again in African American Indians, but American Indians fighters are sometimes called braves, which are never called soldiers. Anybody know why? Why do you don't think of them as soldiers?
They would fight alone.
They would fight alone. When the Indians went to war, an Indian brave would look, oh, he's about my size, I'll fight him. If he won that fight, go look. Soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder and fight as a team, and you don't fight one without fighting them all.
But that came from the Viking people, the whole shield wall thing, isn't that how soldiers like
Say again about the Vikings.
like, all right, the Vikings, like, whenever they fight, there'd always be like a shield wall.
Yeah, a shield wall. That's the way the Hoplites fought, and the Vikings were very difficult to defeat.
Yeah.
But eventually, Europeans had to learn to fight.
So it's like basically like in any fight, it's even when you're facing
Bigger
possible
opponents.
odds, it's the bigger the brain, not the
In a lot of
Okay, I got
cases,
it.
or the better the leadership.
Yeah.
The bigger the brain, the better the leadership, that determines the outcome more so than the quality of the men who are doing the actual fighting. And also, a lot in the modern war depends on who has the best machinery. Best weapons, yeah, machinery, weapons, whatever, yes.
Well, what I don't understand is like when it comes to like bigger brains, like brains
Yeah.
wrinkle, like so your brain has like wrinkles and crinkles
Yeah, oh, yeah,
and things like
yeah.
that in it, and that kind of like resembles surface area.
Yeah.
So, are you saying that the bigger brains, you're not actually saying like bigger, maybe less wrinkles, but you mean like
Actually
they
takes
have-
up more space inside the skull. We don't have an actual Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal brain. All we have is their skulls that, of course, are now empty. And the size of their skulls indicate that inside the skulls they had more room for bigger brain capacity
But
than moderns
is it
do.
less complex, however, though? Like as
Now,
far
well,
as,
this
like-
is something that cannot, you've asked a really good question. It cannot be proven. And the zoology book I have to house from 44 years ago reminds us that the brain size does not necessarily mean intelligence.
Yeah.
Not
That's
necessarily. Yeah.
That's what I was like.
Yeah, that's what,
thinking,
yeah.
because, like,
In other words, now, we get hints that they were bigger, but not necessarily that they were more intelligent.
It's who's able to
However,
adapt faster.
Huh?
Who's able to adapt faster.
Yeah, well, all right. Now, the reason I brought this up was some student in the other class tried to tell me that evolution is a proven fact. It was in 1960, and we were told we have to accept it Problem is, the last 56 years have not been kind to evolution at all. And today, very, very few evolutionists will look you in the face and tell you that evolution is a proven fact. There are some compelling reasons, not just DNA evidence. There are a lot of other compelling reasons. All right, well, for instance, supposing you wanted to take an ordinary animal and give it a long neck like a giraffe. You don't realize all the changes it had. It's not just that you change its neck side, you have to change its shoulder structure, you have to change its muscles, you have to create nerves that go from his brain way up here down here. But something else that a giraffe has that no other mammal has. When he is stretching out his neck to eat leaves off of a tree, then he goes to the water hole and kneels down to drink water. If he didn't have a regulator, he would die of a stroke instantly. But he has a regulator that keeps the pressure, blood pressure in his brain constant. It's something we don't have, something dogs don't have, something cats don't. But if he didn't have that regulator, see his blood pressure, I mean, it's the same on his brain when he's stretched out like this, and the same when he's kneeling down to get a drink of water, his blood pressure. All this had to have, quote unquote, evolved at the same instant, with the same, basically the only way you can get from a short neck to a long neck is not gradually. It's got to happen instantly, bang, then there has to be two well produced. One male and one female at least, or you have no long neck giraffes from short necks. It's like, well, I mean, I live next door to a neighbor who was trying to take motorcycles and thought he could make a better motorcycle. So he'd take the best part from this kind of cycle and mix it with the best part from that kind of cycle. And the result was his motorcycle lasted 100 miles and some part break down. He realized those engineers who designed the thing knew more than he did. You can't make one change without making, and some girls, well, this is the same way with changing a dress. You have to just take one change and have to change another, and then another, and another, and another. Finally, you might get something that works. Yes?
So it's like a balancing act?
Well, everything's about, and machinery is a balancing act. I mean, I can tell you something. I tried to put together many a radio from scrap parts. Sometimes you get one that works, but it might put out a whole lot of radiation you don't want, or it might not put out many power. It might put out inconsistent power, or put out a whole lot of hash. Or interfere with your telephone, interfere with your stereo if you have one, interfere with your iPad. I mean, and after all, hey, the engineers who designed the good radio knew what they were doing. I don't.
Part of the reason why self-driving cars wouldn't work very well.
They might. Now, initially they're not.
Yeah, but then somebody who thought they could serve it themselves is coming the other way.
Well,
And then,
we'll see about the self-driving cars. All right, folks, I'm getting carried away. Civilization. What constitutes a civilization? Oh, and essentially, the word civilization means people who are organized into something more than a tribe. So it means they have civil. In other words, usually a civilization will have a king. They have armies, so they have government, armies, diversity of occupation. In other words, in a civilized amongst you have people who are farmers, people who are blacksmiths, people who are tanners, and again, you get better quality products this way. The blacksmith then doesn't have to grow his own crops. The tanner doesn't have to do his own blacksmithing. You have better quality products because specialized, skilled people do different jobs. And of course, you have scholars. You have not only the government, but you have government officials, hierarchy of authority. A king on top with nobles underneath him, and some way. And you also have courts. Basically, that's part of the government. Courts, where supposedly people can settle their differences in a quote-unquote civil manner. In other words, you have a dispute with a neighbor, you can take it to court, and if you can convince a judge your case is right, you've won. If you can't, I'm going to tell you something, going to court is always a risky business because the other fellow might wind up convincing a judge he has a better case than you do. And of course, courts have often known down through the ages to accept bribes or to pervert judgment in one way or another. So it's risky business. But a lot of it has to do with diversity of occupation, diversity of authority, and most of the time have religion and writing. Now, writing calls for scholars, schoolmen, men who will teach writing to the next generation, reading and writing. All this is part of what we call a civilization, as opposed to uncivilized people. Uncivilized people tend to be tribal, tend to have maybe a chief over the tribe, and that's the extent of their government. No written laws, no writing at all. That's generally what we think of as now. Uncivilized have always lived on the fringe of civilized people, and oftentimes the uncivilized and civilized will clash. This answer I'm about to give may surprise some of you. When the uncivilized and civilized clash, who winds up usually winning?
Uncivilized.
The uncivilized. I don't know how you know that. There are a few exceptions, but down throughout history, you have time and time again, there's time and time again, where that, the Sumerians, for instance, eventually conquered by the Akkadians. Babylon, conquered by the less civilized Hittites. Roman Empire, conquered by the less civilized or even uncivilized Germanians. The Minoans, conquered by the uncivilized Messenians. The Olmec civilization, destroyed by we don't know whom. Generally, the uncivilized will win. And a lot of the reason for this probably is uncivilized people tend to have more children than the civilized. The civilized are more likely to limit the size of their families, limit the number of babies they have. Uncivilized, when I was taking my oral exams for my master's degree, we had one woman and two men. Like the woman was upset because somebody had just wanted, this was August 1975, come up with a theory that the reason the Roman Empire fell was their women would not have children. Like this was so terrible. She said this is a barbaric theory. Well, it turned out in my research it was very barbaric, because the barbaric women had all babies. Roman women, and we'll talk about this, Roman women became thoroughly corrupted. The result was the whole Roman civilization went down the tube and was replaced by the Germanic civilization. This is one of the reasons, folk, why the civilizations fall. And I had to say, well, why haven't we seen a civilization fall lately? Western civilization might be on the brink of tottering and falling right now, and you may live long enough to see it. I might even live long enough to see it. Yes?
Just put a theory out there.
Go ahead. Theory? Go ahead.
Advancements in technology have been the great equalizer between civilized people and uncivilized people. Now the numbers don't matter as much as...
Advancements, okay. That is very well put, very well put. The problem is we civilized people are giving the uncivilized our technology at a very rapid, fast rate. Otherwise, they would never catch us. So we're giving away our technology to people who might almost have to consider practically uncivilized. People who do not abide by the rules that the rest of humanity abides by. And the result is uncivilized people, I've got to call them that, are getting the nuclear bomb and missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. And the civilized people are too civilized to even fight. So, okay, granted, we have the nuclear bomb, and hey, so do they. Now, we have intercontinental ballistic missiles, yes, so do they now. Didn't have to be that way, but it is. And also, a lot of your civilized people join up with the uncivilized to betray. The reason that Russia got the atomic bomb was too many American scientists gave the secrets to them. This, even they will admit, especially after the Cold War ended, and they said, oh yeah, the Rosenbergs who were executed for treason, they really did know us out. We never proved our case against them, but we just knew they were guilty. We executed them. I'm talking about Mr. and Mrs. Rosenberg. Then the Russians said, oh, they really gave it. Stalin admitted we could not have done it without them. But anyway, what you brought out is a good point. So technology does help, but in the long run, All right, anyway, you have your civilized, your uncivilized, and down through time, generally uncivilized people won. Now there was one exception to that, notable exception, when the Europeans came and found the American Indians. In general, at least the American Indians living in what is today the United States and Canada were basically uncivilized. I mean, if you've had offended you, I'm really sorry. But the civilized people won owing to the fact that European women were having an average of 6 to 8 babies per woman, while American Indian women wouldn't have more than 1 or 2 babies per woman. And to keep in mind, the average American Indian only lived 18 years. And folks, if it hadn't been for the white man coming over, the Indian would have become extinct. The Europeans came in and saved them from extinction. All right, I'm jumping ahead of the story a little bit, but save the Indians from extinction. All right. Okay. Anyway, civilization. Now, the big issue is, did primitive man learn to become civilized, or was civilization a legacy given to him? The Sumerians told us civilization was given to them by their gods. Be that what it may, whatever you choose to believe. All right. In the Middle East, you have eventually 3 groups of people who spread out from the Middle Eastern area. Your Semitic peoples, your Hamitic, and your Indo-Europeans. Anybody know where these names Semitic and Hamitic come from? Semitic comes from Noah's son Shem, and Hamitic comes from Noah's son Ham. These were descended from Noah's son Japheth. Now again, you might say, hey, I'm teaching theology. No, this is basic standard history. Who were the Semitic people? All right, the Assyrians, the Elamites, especially Babylon, and your Arabians, your Arabs. These were Semitic people. Who were your Hamitic people? Egypt, and most of your African people, and most of your Far Eastern people, particularly your Sinites, otherwise known as Chinese. And then Indo-European people, they are your Persians, Greeks, Romans, Germans, Britons, people, from the part of Europe, Indo-European. Now again, most of your Islamic people today are Semitic. The Arabs originally are believed to have been descended from Noah's son Shem. The Sumerian gods, I think I mentioned Anu was the first, followed by Enki, followed by 2 of them, Enki and his brother Enlil. Anu was the original one, who was supposedly the first god to come down from heaven and join up with humanity. Eventually, Anu fell from worship. All these old gods tended to fall from favor at one time. Wait, this is Enlil. These 2 were brothers. The son of one of them, I believe Enki's son, was Marduk. All right, now Anu, you'll find him among the Romans. He was called Uranus. Now, you see this word Uranus has in the middle of it the word Anu. Uranus. And Marduk, that's Mars. Enlil, here Jupiter, or Zeus. In other words, these gods that the Sumerians had eventually spread out over the globe and became the gods of the various nations. And in the case of, if you know your Greek mythology, any at all, Uranus was the first, and Uranus was very evil. So he tried to kill his sons, but eventually Saturn, one of his sons, took over and overthrew him. And then Saturn was just as evil, and then it just meant. Then it came, finally, Saturn had 3 sons, Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. And these 3 sons got together and overthrew him. Go ahead.
Like, he like tried to keep them.
He ate them, but they eventually managed to regurgitate themselves out to
So he sprouted out his head or something.
Yeah, and anyway, you have a comment? Say again?
Isn't that Roman mythology?
Yeah, there's Greek and Romans worship the same gods with different names. Yeah, Zeus is the name that the Greeks gave him. And in the case of Saturn, the Greeks, I believe, called him Kronos. Mercury was Hermes, and Minerva was Athena, and Venus was Aphrodite. They had different names, but they were the same deities. And when you come right down to it, there's a lot of people believe that the Sumerian deities and these other deities were the same gods with different names. Thor associated with thunder, Jupiter associated with thunder, Enlil, Thor, Jupiter, Zeus, all the same god with different names, largely as a result of probably languages. All right. Anyway, these were their gods, and as time went on, each of these gods fell from favor, were replaced by the later gods. Eventually, Marduk was replaced by Nabu. And when Nabu fell out of favor, all these old deities seemed to fall to the wayside and eventually give rise to Christianity, or in some cases to Islam. No, go ahead. What's that? How did these gods get started? That is a really super loaded question. According to what the ancients believe now, folks, this is what they tell us, and it's all I have to go on. These gods came down to earth, set up a physical presence in their temples, and eventually they all left earth, perhaps one at a time. Beginning with Anu, who came first and left first. They all left. Yes?
I read once that every time a different civilization becomes like people at the time,
Yeah.
the gods of the previous religion become like demons and are like outcasted because they give place to new gods or whatever. And that pretty much almost every religion or whatever has the same creation story, just
Different names. Well, they all have, almost all religions have a creation story, a Garden of Eden story, a flood story, and stories of dragons and demigods and half gods and half human. Now, something about what's really unusual about human beings, they'll conquer a people and then adopt the religion of the people they conquer. This has happened more than once. We'll talk about how that the Mongolians conquered the Islamic people, then became Islamic themselves. But a lot of times people would conquer another group of people and then take on their gods. But sometimes, though, they impose their own gods on the people they conquered. Yes? Which word? Nabu?
Above that.
Oh, Marduk. M-A-R-D-U-K. I can rewrite it. I once taught 5th graders, and one of them they had to teach was penmanship. And I would quote the philosopher Plato, and I'll be quoting him again. They never know what Plato said. Do as I say, but don't do as I do. And I'd tell my 5th grader too, do as I say, but don't do as I do. All right. No, I was a lousy 5th grade teacher. That's nice. All right. Okay, now, these people, well, leaving their religion for a while, these people would tend to congregate in city-states. These city-states were mostly located along the banks of rivers. It's not hard to see why. The rivers supplied them with water, and because a lot of this area was dry, they needed to be along the banks of rivers in order to get the water for their crops and, of course, for drinking, for bathing, for their animals. And some of the chief cities, of course, the Sumerians were Ur, I've already talked about Umma, Babylon, Ashur. They would locate along the banks of rivers. And the city always had a temple. The temple might not always be in the center, but it would be in a prominent place in the city. And they'd always have a palace where the king lived. And these city-states would often go to war and conquer other city-states, or at least try to. And we remember the ones who did the most to build up the biggest empire. One of the first figures of history is Sargon. Sargon of Agad. He built a big empire. Did I talk about Sargon last class? Okay. Sargon was one of the 3 people in the ancient world who was put in a basket as a baby and floated down the river and expected to die. Sargon was the first. The second one was Moses, and the third one was Cyrus. All 3 of these men had one thing in common. They were put in a basket and floated down the river. In the case of Sargon, some people found him, and eventually he grew up to become a high official in the palace of the king of Uruk. Lugal-Zagissi by name, but don't worry about the name, but he became a high official of Uruk, and eventually he overthrew Lugal-Zagissi and took the throne himself. And he conquered several city-states, but a huge famine occurred during his time and almost destroyed his empire. And a lot of people believe that this famine was the same famine mentioned in the time of Abraham. It was a famine, but a huge famine that might have been brought on by a possible nuclear holocaust. And I hesitate to say it, folks. This can only be speculated on. But again, we in America most of us do not really know what a famine is. I have to admit that I don't. But you read about them in time past, the famine where there's no food to be had and nothing to be eaten. Again, we can hardly imagine that. But Sargon was also buddies with Enlil. And Enlil was the one who helped him conquer, and Enlil sided with him and helped him rise up. If you can believe that Enlil was still on the earth at the time. Again, everything depends on your worldview. I mean, back in 2002, a young female student wrote something in a paper that I've never forgotten. So quoted directly, what you believe about the Sumerians will depend on your worldview, whether religious or philosophical or historical. What you believe about them will depend on your worldview. But anyway, Sargon is looked on as being the first historical figure that we actually believe existed. You might say, what about Gilgamesh? More and more scholars are starting to believe that Gilgamesh existed. Gilgamesh would have been a few generations before Sargon. Anyway, after Sargon, the next thing I'll talk about is Hammurabi. He was the king of Babylon. Hammurabi, king of Babylon. Some will say that he was the one who first built the Babylonian Empire. Others will say no, Babylon was actually initially built way before Hammurabi, and Hammurabi rebuilt it. Babylon is a city that has been built several times and destroyed several times. Built again and destroyed. Built again and destroyed. And Saddam Hussein started to rebuild the city. Depending on what you believe, folk. Some people believe that Babylon is going to be rebuilt again and become super powerful again sometime in the perhaps not too distant future. 30 years ago, that might have seemed anathema, but today we've seen a nation called ISIS rise up out of the dust from nothing. And folks, it can happen. Anyway, Hammurabi is remembered for his law code. His law code reminds us a lot of Moses. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Your book gives an example of his laws. Now, one thing I want to point out to you, his laws tend to seem to show favoritism towards higher ranking people. If you cut out an eye of a man of equal rank, then your eye was to be put out. But if you cut out the eye of a person of lesser rank, you only had to pay a fine. And some people think, hey, this shows unfairness or partiality. Others say that this is what is necessary to have a civilization. I mean, in the Army, they taught us rank has privileges. The higher the rank, I was a driver for an officer one time, and one of the men said, "Sir," if I said to my officer, "Sir, if I had your rank, I'd go in and take a shower." I kept my mouth shut. That officer not only went back into the camp, I mean, into the barracks and took a shower, he invited me to do the same, which I did. But these men were having to stay in the field for days on end without taking a bath and having to dry shave or shave out of their helmet. I mean, some of you might know what I'm talking about. Tougher than the Boy Scouts had it, but again, being the driver of the officer, he had privileges. I took advantage of the ones I had. Anyway, leaving that. Hammurabi, it took him 30 years to build up an empire, and in his 30 years, he started off conquering one of the weaker cities around him. He was smart in that. He got that city on his side. Then he conquered the next city with that first city on his side, the next weak city. And after 30 years, he had conquered all the region around Babylon, more than 30 different city-states. He conquered them at about the rate of one a year. He had a very large empire built up. Well, here is the pattern that you find among these people. Too much depended on the ability of one man. When Hammurabi died, his son was not as capable of managing as he was. This happened time and time and time again. You have an empire builder, turns over his throne to an incompetent son, and somebody outside takes advantage of the weakness of that son and comes in. And Babylon was sacked by the Hittites. The king's name was Shupaluli-Umus, but don't worry about the name. I mean, if you take advanced world history, folks, particularly history of the Near East, like I did, you'll have to learn names like Shupaluli-Umus, Lugal, I guess, but we're just a survey here. Babylon was sacked. Now, hey, folk, in my own lifetime, I've seen a few men I call empire builders, and I don't mean to be knocking them, man. One of the most famous empire builders was Oral Roberts. Before he died, he turned his empire over to his son. His son couldn't manage it. His empire died. Now, some of you might be a little bit familiar with what I'm talking about. But this is a prime example. Happened over and over and over again in the ancient world. The son could not manage what the father built up, and the result was disaster for everybody concerned. Now, in our country, we try to make sure that one man does not influence everything. We follow not the man, the Constitution. And also, when I was in the Army, they told us, when you see an officer and you salute him, you are not saluting the man. You're saluting the office he holds. You follow the office he holds. You're saluting the bars he wears, or the maple leaf he might wear, or even the bird he might wear, or the stars he wears. You're saluting that. You're not saluting the man. And officers, to make sure that one man doesn't, they're told you have to move around. Yeah, move around to make sure that the Army is conducted according to a set of rules and regulations, not according to the whims of the man. But in those days, their empire was built up by a man, and by a man it fell. Anyway, Hammurabi, his empire fell. All right, I'm going to have to stop here. Everybody have a good weekend.